What's up, my wizards? It's Dev. Mtg. We like it. A magic down there on your device's screen. And you know what? The War of the Spark hype train is still screaming down the tracks like a bullet. But today, we're going to try and slow things down a little bit. And what better way to bring about that tranquility than with a little bit of green? Monogreen, to be exact. So we can finally talk about one of my favorite planeswalkers in this whole new set full of planeswalkers. And that's Nissa. Who shakes the world, girls? I always think of that Beyonce song every time I see this card. But her hips don't lie. This is easily one of the better planeswalkers in Standard, even if it hasn't necessarily been recognized yet. Now, I like to look at Nissa this way. Like, normal ramp in the game of Magic is like that ramp that you built out of plywood in your driveway when you're like 12 years old and you're like, I'm getting air. But Nissa is like the ramp at the X Games. You know, it just goes all the way up. Does anybody remember the X Games? Remember the X Games were a thing? Now, this storied ramp is what we're mostly going to be paying attention to in this deck, which makes sense. You know, this just looks like one of the most broken, potentially, passive abilities on any planeswalker in all of War of the Spark, you know? Your mind really starts churning with filthy, gross things you can do. If you untap with a Nissa on the board and you just have like 10 mana, turns out you can like cast spells, like whatever you want at that point in the game. And it's not too hard to keep your Nissa protected for a turn because she contests the board by herself and makes blockers that protect her the turn she comes down. She also can just untap a land, which is, if you untap a forest, it's like untapping 2 lands. It's reminiscent of 5 minutes of Fairy, but you don't have to wait until the end of the turn. So you can just like play a creature to further protect Nissa at that point, like a 2-drop creature or something. There's just a lot you can do the turn you play Nissa because you get to untap a forest, which can either be a creature to play defense for you or offense for that matter. Or you can untap that forest and play a 2-drop. There's just a ton of action on the turn you get this card down, but untapping with it in play is when you really start being able to do some disgusting garbage. And yeah, we'll play the entire playset of Nissa here, you know. Control deck is often going to play a 4-of to Fairy. Not all the time, I know that. You don't have to tell me in the comments, but a lot of control decks will still play their 4-of Hero of Dominaria. It's just the most important card in the deck. We'll play 4-of our 5-mana Planeswalker, because we won't be able to drop it as early as turn 3 as often as possible. That's right, it's not actually too hard at all to drop Nissa on turn 3 in this deck. We'll get to it, we'll talk about that. But first, I'm going to show you what we're actually trying to use all this mana on here, and that's Finale of Devastation. This is kind of a half Nissa, half Finale of Devastation deck. They play really well together. Because Nissa exists, and just green ramp in general, this is probably the finale that's going to get played for X equals 10 or more, like, the most out of all the finales. I don't know. I mean, like, the black one has Cabal Strongholds. I mean, we'll see, but still, I think that in the end, this is obviously, like, kind of the strongest of the finales in terms of performance so far. And you can see why. You know, it's a tutor not only through your library, but through your graveyard. Keep that in mind. There's actually tricks in this deck. You know, a card here or there that forces you to discard cards. So you can always just discard big, stupid guys into your graveyard and then effectively reanimate them with a Finale of Devastation. Just never forget that you have that option. But what this really allows us to do is play just a gang of 1-of creatures in the deck and play like a kind of toolboxy strategy, you know, just go get whatever we need for any given moment. And especially once we have a Nissa out, it becomes really easy to just go get a huge creature and swing for 1 billion. Even if we don't really have any other creatures out, we can swing for 17 like really easily in this deck if we have Nissa plus Finale. Even if we have like nothing else on the board, we're presenting a ridiculous threat that can end the game like immediately. Also like the name, you know, yeah. Also like the name, you know, I really miss being able to play Hour of Devastation and be like, Hour of Devastation, blah, blah, blah. I'm sure, I'm just realized how tiring I am, but anyway, now I get to play Finale of Devastation and be tiring again and be like, Finale of Devastation, I'm sure people just love playing Magic with me. Now, I mentioned back there, just a second ago, you'll remember, that we're playing a bunch of, like, 1-of giant dudes in this deck, for lack of a better term. I guess there's better terms. We're playing a bunch of 1-of huge creatures in this deck, which might look weird, especially to newer players, and I know there's a lot of newer players. So I figured I'd explain this, because I'm sure some people will be like, why are you playing all these 1-ofs? That's dumb. Again, we've got Finale of Devastation, so we can search up any of these big dudes. Whenever we need them, especially if we have a Nissa in play, it becomes really, really easy to go get any of these. So that said, we get to, think of it that way, we get to play 1-ofs of all of these creatures, rather than having the chance that, you know, we're going to draw 2 6-drops and a 7-drop in our opening hand, and just have this uncastable pile of cards in our hand for like 6 turns. We don't want that. So instead, we get to play 1-ofs in this deck, like our 1-of Carnage Tyrant. And honestly, If I was going to buff up any of these and play like a 2 of one of these big creatures, it would probably be Carney 2, you know. You can ramp into Carnage Tyrant pretty easily without actually ever seeing a Nissa. You know, it's not too hard to get this on turn 4 in this deck. Turn 5, very easily. And Carnage Tyrant's always going to help you turn the game around. It's really, really good against control, especially in game 1. This is a great tool against control decks. And very often, this is what you want to go get with Finale of Devastation anyway. So I really wouldn't mind having extra copies. And we've actually got more in the sideboard, but that's not so bad nowadays. Remember when this card was like 28 bucks? It's down to 10 now. It's not going to stretch the wallet too much to actually get these Carnage Tyrants. And I think they're still pretty important sort of metagame tools. They can be dealt with. There's plenty of ways to deal with them, yes. But it still presents a much harder to deal with target than pretty much any other giant creature we could be playing. But I'm also playing a one-of Biogenic Ooze in this deck for a few reasons. You know, we need a mana sink. I don't mind drawing Ooze. You know, if we actually happen to come across it in a game, it's a nice card to draw because you can get it pretty early in this deck. Just like you can play Nissa on turn 3, you can play an Ooze on turn 3, and that's really early. You know, that can spiral out of control pretty quickly, and it gives us a mana sink. You know, we're making all this extra mana with Nissa, and it's nice when you just draw another forest to be able to actually use your mana. And sometimes, you know, again, it's easy to untap with like 8-10 mana on the battlefield if you actually untap with a Nissa in play. You can just pump all that mana into a Biogenic Ooze if you got nothing better to do, and suddenly you just filled your board with things, you know. But something else that's cool about this is that you can, you know, Finale of Devastation for X equals 10, put a Biogenic Ooze in play, and suddenly just swing for the win right then and there, because you're going to do well over 20 damage, you know. I say well over, you're going to do like 24 damage if you're actually able to get in with both Biogenic Oozes. So it's just an immediate kill shot on an uncontested board. We need a card that does that too. I'm also playing a one-of Ronus in this deck. Just the one. We really don't ever want to draw more than one because he's just going to keep coming back anyway. In this deck, we can search him up as needed, and we will. Some of the time, you know, Biogenic Ooze can come down and just kill them if they don't have any creatures to block, but Ronus requires you to go a little bit wider, but that's fine, you know, if you do have a board with, like, you know, Llanowar Elves, Incubation Druid, you know, another 2-drop or something like that, then it's really easy to go wide and win off of a Ronus. Even if you don't get X equals 10 on your Finale of Devastation, just play a Ronus and swing in. That extra power is going to mean an awful lot, but obviously combining the two cards is where the nuts are at, you know. Not only will you get the giant boost from Finale of Devastation, but you also get to double their power from Ronus, so even if you have just a few other creatures on the board, you should probably win the game right then. Now to finish off the big giant things in this deck, we're going to play one copy of the Pig. Not Ilharg, but Inray's Forerunners. The original, the OG Big Pig in the standard environment. You can't just say the Big Pig now, because people might get confused, but we're playing ERF in the deck. This kind of works like Ronus in some ways, you know. On a wide enough board, if we hit an X equals 10 finale, bring this into play, we can easily win the game immediately. Not just from the damage this does, but just from the damage that like one or two other ancillary creatures do. Especially the fact that this gifts our creatures trample, that's great. That's absolutely unbelievable. And very often, this is going to be a better card to search up with Finale than Ronus is. But that said, I would probably much rather draw a Ronus over the normal course of the game than I would an Inray's Forerunners. So with that said, there's a 1-1 split between them. But this is not the only ramp tool that we've got in the deck. We got to go to outer space, dude. We got a lot of really expensive cards in this deck, if you didn't notice. So untapping with Nissa in play is not going to be enough to X equals 10 a finale like every time. So we need to play some mana ramper things in this deck, starting with Llanowar Elves. You know, the Lawnmower might cut, but you don't cut the Lawnmower. This is definitely, like, far and away the best ramp card in Standard, and sort of all of our best play sequences start with a turn 1 Lawnmower Elf, so we got to play this card. But we're also playing Incubation Druid. Also as a 4-of, you know, we need 2-drop creatures if we can possibly help it in this deck, but we need 2-drops in general, because I'd like to be able to not only get a 2-drop on turn 2. I mean, that goes without saying. Sometimes, if we get a turn 1 Llanowar Elf, we can just skip the 2-drop slot. That does happen occasionally, but you want to be able to play a 2-drop on turn 2 most of the time. But obviously, there's Nissa turns. You know, we play a Nissa, we can immediately untap a forest and play a 2-drop creature. So I want to be able to, you know, play a fair amount of diverse 2-drops in the deck. And Incubation Druid definitely plays into our plan. You know, not only will this produce at least a 1 green mana, and that kind of ramp will matter. You know, turn 1 Llanowar Elves, turn 2 Incubation Druid. Suddenly, turn 3 Nissa is a very, very real possibility if they don't have opening removal. So, it's, you know, one play line that we want pretty much every time. But obviously, if we can get the counter on an Incubation Druid, which is really easy once we do have Nissa in play, it's a pretty good investment to make. Adapt your incubation druid, start going to town. But once we do have the counter on it, it becomes much, much easier to actually cast a Finale of Devastation for X equals 10. So this creature is just kind of an obvious include to me. Now we're also playing 4 copies of Gift of Paradise in the deck. This, after some deliberation, I think is the best of all of the 3-drop ramp we could play. I tried Elvish Rejuvenator, which I really thought would be the better 3-drop, all things considered, but honestly, we don't care about the body as much as we care about the 3 life. Usually they translate into, give or take, the same amount of damage saved, a blocking 1/1 or 3 life gained. So that's not really a big deal, but sometimes Elvish Rejuvenator will whiff, which we really don't want, and Gift of Paradise goes especially well in combination with Nissa. You put your Gift of Paradise on a forest, untap a forest, and suddenly that forest taps for 3 mana. So that's very, very good once you actually do have your Nissa in play. Plus, Gift of Paradise is probably just one of the best ramp pieces in the format. Period. Just no questions asked. So yeah, it is our 3-drop ramp piece in this deck. Now, I tried a bunch of other stuff in the 2-drop slot. Most notably, I think Druid of the Cowl here, but didn't quite work out. I think we'd much rather play Growth Chamber Guardian to have a relevant threat in the early game that is good on its own. Again, if we never see a Nissa or even like any ramp elements or anything, then we can easily adapt this and continue to get more and more copies of it. But when we do have a Nissa, oh, my card is ridiculous. Again, it's important to have mana sinks. I was talking about this with Biogenic Ooze, but in this deck, it's important to have mana sinks because what if you finally drop your Nissa? You're actually able to untap with her. And then you just draw like a forest, you got no gas. So it's really important to have mana sinks like Growth Chamber Guardian because there's turns where, again, you untap with Nissa and play, it's very easy to have access to, at the very least, 8 mana, and if you actually use nothing but forest to play Nissa, you got yourself 10 mana, kid. So at that point, you can adapt to Growth Chamber Guardian, go get another one, play that one, adapt it, go get another one. So just a great way to use our mana on turns where we otherwise can't. Now, this last card in the 2-drop slot has been a lot of cards, but what I ended up on was the Treasure Map in this slot. It looks a little bit weird, but this is another thing that we can, play a Nissa, immediately untap a forest, and get down a Treasure Map, which is nice. Plus, we don't have a whole lot of ways of fixing our draws or drawing cards, period, in this deck, and it's something that we really need to try to invest in. This can do both. This fixes draws in the early game for a relatively low mana investment, and there's going to be turns, especially in a ramp deck, where you have extra mana left over. You can always use that on your Treasure Map. Scry a little bit. And then when you actually get your treasures, it's another ramp element that helps you play all these huge creatures if you never saw a Nissa in a given game, so that's nice. But it also helps you draw into more gas to actually play if you do have a Nissa out. So there's just so much about Treasure Map. It's a good play against, non-aggressive decks in the early game because it's going to end up giving you just a ton of advantage in mid and longish games. So there's just a lot to like about Treasure Map, and I think it's probably the best card for this 2-drop slot. Now, there's just a couple of other main deck cards to cover, including the one of Vivian's Arcbow. Now, yeah, I'm only playing one of this in the main deck at least. There's another one in the board, because this works great in, again, longer, grindier kind of matches where the game's going to go a few turns longer than you may have originally anticipated. A card like this is fantastic. Yet another mana sink that fixes your dead draws. Again, it feels really bad to draw dead with a Nissa in play and not have anything to do with your mana. So Vivian's Arcbow can fix that problem really fast. And there are 16 creatures in the deck, which is fewer than you usually want to play if you're playing Arcbow. But that said, especially in a ramp deck in the late game, we're going to have plenty of mana to pump into an Arcbow. So it's not going to be too hard to go immediately grab a creature off the top 8 cards of our library or whatever in the relative late game. Plus, this, if you have a Nissa out, it kind of feels like a Finale of Devastation. If you can pump 10, 12 mana into this the way you would if you're trying to, get the most value out of Finale, then you're almost guaranteed to find a gas creature in the top 10 or 12 cards of your library. There's also a cool little synergy with Finale of Devastation. If you need to, you can discard a giant guy to Vivian's Arcbow to search up sort of a more reasonable creature from the top few cards of your library, and then later when you're actually able to pump all the mana into Finale, then you can get that giant creature out of your graveyard that you discarded to Arcbow. So that's a cool little piece of tech. Get it? Tech, bow? Some of you have never taken archery in your lives, but anyway. The last card in the main deck is 3 whole copies, you gotta trust me on this one, of Yujin, the Ineffable. in the deck because this just gives us removal. You know, we're ramping anyway. I don't really stunt playing 6-drops that much in this deck because it's very easy to get to 6 mana and we get there. On turn 4, not a great deal of the time, but a relatively consistent amount of the time, we can have access to an Ugin by turn 4, just like we can play a turn 4 Carnage Tyrant, you know. So even though it looks weird to have 4 6-drops, this is a ramp deck. That's a way of life for us. And I think that Ugin is probably the better main deck call than a card like Carnage Tyrant, you know. This will win us the game over a period of time, some of the time, and, you know, it's a creature factory that +1s and draws us cards. I've already said we need more card draw in this deck, so this gives us another way to draw cards, in a roundabout way, but it is. And, you know, this is removal, and green decks just don't really have access to that. So I think that, in a way, this is kind of the best deck you could play Ugin in, because we're a ramp deck, we don't have access to any other real pieces that can do this for us. So, yeah, all 3 copies of Ugin. I was on 2 for the longest time, but you just kind of always want to see it once you have the mana to play it. It's going to get that giant thing out of the way, or keep that giant thing from killing you, or just fill the board with tokens that draw you cards if they die. There's just, everything Ugin does is really very nice. And I know you can't search this up with Finale or whatever, but I kind of don't care. I want to take advantage of the fact that we're playing ramp. You know, if we go turn 4 Nissa, or turn 3 Nissa even, then we can untap, play an Ugin, and still have mana left over to play around with. So yeah, all 3 copies of Ugin. This is the best removal spell we could possibly play. Now here are our lands. We're playing 25. I was on 24 for a majority of this deck's lifespan in testing, but it turns out it's just not enough. You know, you got to make your drops all the way to turn 5, sometimes turn 6, you know, especially with the large amount of, like, pretty high dollar cards we're playing in the deck. You know, again, 4 6-drops, a bunch of 5-drops, you know, not just Nissa, but also a couple of creatures are 5s. So, plus we got 5-drops in the sideboard. Like, you have got to make your drops in this deck, even if you're ramping. So, 25 is right, but I want to spend the majority here talking about Blast Zone. It's not a forest, but you got to play it. This is another good removal option. You know, I almost wanted to call this a Monogreen control deck, but that's a lie. I can't lie. So, it's not quite Monogreen control, but it's more controlled than most green decks, both with, you know, it's got Ugin and Blast Zone, which is insane, especially in a ramp deck, because it's much easier to actually have the mana to put the number of counters on it that you need to put on it. And note the trick with Nissa that's available to us in this deck with Blast Zone. You don't get to do this in like any other deck, but in our mana base, we get to play Blast Zone, put counters on it, and then untap it with a Nissa on the same turn. So we can put counters on this, and then if we have a Nissa out, untap it, and it's very likely that we still have enough mana to activate it. So being able to put counters on Blast Zone and activate it in the same turn is really, really nice. Just keep that in mind. So Blast Zone performs even better in this deck than it does in the wide variety of decks that it's already been in this format. It's a removal piece, and again, green will take all the access to that it can get. And this one ain't half bad. Now here's the board, and there's a lot you can do with this sideboard. Turns out Monogreen is actually pretty versatile in its sideboard options, so there's a lot you could do here, but I've chosen to start with Sorceress Spyglass. This is an answer to Planeswalkers. And although we do have some answers, you know, again, we've got Ugin in the deck, we've got Blast Zone in the deck, these can answer Planeswalkers. Sorceress Spyglass is a good proactive way to, you know, not have to deal with Planeswalkers you know you're going to have to deal with at some point down the line. So just for a little bit more protection, we'll play Spyglass. As far as Crawl Harpooner, this is obviously against flyers. We don't have a whole lot of creatures in this deck, but if the game goes pretty long, then this is always going to be worth its weight. And sometimes it can come down and not even fight. You know, remember that it's always going to get the +X+O boost, but it does not necessarily have to fight. So if you bring this in with like a Finale of Devastation, X = 10, it'll get the Finale of Devastation bonus and the Enter the Battlefield bonus. Sometimes that'll be really, really important, so keep that in mind. Crawl Harpooner could be in the main deck, and it's another 2-drop you could play over Treasure Map if you wanted to do that, to give you another removal option if you really want to play Mono Green Control. I swear to God, it's possible. But anyway, there's the other Vivian's Arcbow in there too. This is a legendary artifact. Don't want to play too many copies of it, but 2 is fine in the control matchup, where this is basically a card that lets you draw whatever card you want in the late game, and that's much better than whatever garbage you actually drew on any given turn. So another copy of Arcbow, because it's kind of, you know, our search for Azcanta, to put it in those terms. But you also see the Vivian Reed, which too could be in the main deck. Again, I'll say it one more time. I'll probably say it more, but one more time at least in this video. Mono Green Control could be a very real thing. And Vivian Reed in the main deck would probably be a part of that, but Vivian just takes out problem flyers, problem artifacts. You know, if they have an Immortal Sun, Vivian can take care of that. And problem enchantments, which are definitely a thing. Again, just like Planeswalkers, we have enchantment removal in this main deck. You know, we got Ugin, we got Blast Zone. It just takes out so many different things, but it's nice to have Vivian around in the sideboard for games 2 and 3 when we know we have to be taking care of Experimental Frenzy, Wilderness Reclamation, whatever. So a couple of copies of Viv is pretty standard at this point. I'm sorry for how much she costs. She's kind of the most expensive card in the deck, but there's a reason for that. She's just super gassy, and even if you can't use her for removal at any given time, she's card draw, something I've already said a few times this deck could really use. But anyway, here's your power rankings for this deck right here. Final score of 65, which isn't too bad. You know, it's a respectable score, but it's also not in the upper echelon or anything. And the price follows the same trend. You know, it's just slightly north of $200 to build this deck right now, which isn't budget or anything, but it's also not, you know, again, the upper high tiers of what a standard deck can cost you right now. It's not going to cost you an arm and a leg, just an arm. It's probably worth it for the kook factor, but, you know, it's not just all about the kookiness with this deck. This deck has some really respectable play lines. It can win on turn 4 some of the time if you know, on a goldfished, completely uncontested board. If you happen to go like turn 1 Lawnmower Elves, turn 2 Gifted Paradise, turn 3 Nissa, turn 4 untap with all those things still in play, you can Finale of Devastation for X equals 10 and go get a Biogenic Ooze, finish the game right then and there. It's a possible play line, but, you know, there's turn 5 and 6 play lines that win you the game too. Even on contested boards that have creatures on them and stuff. So if the deck actually gets its nut draws, which are not as, you know, it's not as inconsistent as you might think, it can really threaten to just end the game like pretty fast. But even if it doesn't and it has to play a longer game, it's got options. You know, we've got Treasure Map in here to scry and draw cards for us. Ugin effectively draws us cards, fills our board with creatures. There's effective card advantage off of things like Growth Chamber Guardian, and Nissa, for what that's worth, that kind of makes creatures for us, and the ultimate is real card advantage. Card advantage on Biogenic Ooze, virtual card advantage if nothing else, but card advantage nonetheless. So in a longer game, once this deck actually is able to both use its mana effectively on all the different sinks in the deck and just drop giant dudes with all of its mana, then it just becomes this torrential onslaught. Turn after turn, the opponent has these threats it must answer or die. But we have to, again, get to that point in the game. And I'll acknowledge it's not always as easy as all that. Let me know how you felt about this one, or any stuff I didn't play you have questions about. Give it to me down there on the sideboard, and I will catch you cats later. I mean, do all the YouTube stuff too, you know. Like the video if you enjoyed the video, or even if you didn't just like it, it takes like half a second, and it helps somebody out. And, you know, what better than to have compassion for the people that you don't really like? That's a moral code right there. So even if you didn't like it, like the video, sucker. Whatever. You know, subscribe if you haven't done it yet. Or if you're new around here and you like my face and my style and my deck techs and my steez. Steez is style, so I kind of said that twice. But anyway, if you like what I do around here, subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell so you're notified when I put videos out. And if you really, really like your dude, then go over to the patreon.com/SBMTG. Link in the description, and just throw $1. Just $1. $1 a month. Are you even still here? I bet most of you have tuned out or left the video by now. But if you're still here and you haven't done it yet, $1 a month means mountains and islands and forests and plains and swamps. So if you got $1, get in there. If not, that's cool. I just like that you're here. But in any case, your turn. Let me know how you felt about it, and I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dev from the place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.